Harvard Divinity School.
100 Years Rudolf Steiner, December 15th and 16th, 2025.
Ryan Boynton. I hail from Chicago. I first encountered anthroposophy here at Harvard as an undergraduate at the age of 18 in a freshman seminar. And so I have degrees from Harvard and University of Chicago. I'm now an independent scholar. I do philosophy of science. I'm attached to things at the University of Chicago still. My brief words today are an invitation to consider how Rudolf Steiner and his age mate, Alfred North Whitehead, beckon to us through their words and the ways we meet them through our activity of reading. Although the question of the relation between words and knowing arises in antiquity, I begin with the more immediate context framing the efforts of both Steiner and Whitehead. In 1687, Isaac Newton publishes the Mathematical Principles of Natural Philosophy, in which he presents an all-encompassing account of the motion in the heavens and on the earth by formulating a mathematical description of the force that pulls every bit of matter in the entire cosmos towards every other bit. His stunning achievement changes the notion of explanation in two connected ways. First, the universal scale of the achievement suggests that here the human mind has touched something at the foundation of reality, so that we are now on the path to an explanation of everything. The sciences that emerge over the following centuries find in physics both their model and their ground. Newton, however, is unable to account for universal gravitation in terms of matter bumping against matter. So he redefines the notion of force. Now force becomes entirely abstract. A force is known only by its effects. This redefinition transforms the notion of knowing, because now, to explain something, all one needs to do is provide a description of the regularity, the law that governs the phenomena. As a result, understanding is no longer attained through a transformation of experience, but instead through a system of concepts formulated by the creative power of the human mind that describes the world in general terms, the sort of description that allows us to wield the power of prediction. Knowledge now resides in thinking and in the descriptions of thinking communicated in writing, while the uncreative world waits patiently to be described and manipulated. The project of science becomes the work of turning the world into information for analysis by the human mind. As a result, knowing becomes disconnected from experience, because we have placed our thinking and its expression in words in the way. Our knowledge of the world resides in what we have created in thought, rather than in what we can intuit. The sense of this disconnection only grows more acute over the following centuries. And I ask you to keep this picture in mind as we go forward. From a young age, Steiner has experiences that are uncommon, experiences that he can't speak about openly because they have no legitimate place within the reality common to most other people. But he learns to cultivate his awareness, develop, extend, and intensify it. Near the age of 40, he determines that conditions are now appropriate for him to bring his experience to the world, with the aim of offering other people assistance in cultivating their own experience and in discovering for themselves the urgency of this task. Whitehead's task, in contrast, originates in doubt. He recognizes that our experience of the world and our imaginative perception of future possibilities are shaped and guided by our notions of the nature of reality. He is distressed by the thought that if these notions are inadequate, they confine and obstruct experience. And he has serious doubts about the present adequacy of such notions, including his own, especially since they lie largely unacknowledged in the dim background of consciousness. He realizes the relation of thinking to experiencing must be reconsidered so that we can try to fashion, in a careful, deliberate way, metaphysical schemes that arise out of experience rather than suppress it. For the sake of ourselves and the world, we need to wake up and take responsibility for our thinking. Let me briefly characterize the effort by which Whitehead arrives at his metaphysical scheme. I think this is probably not a thing everyone knows about. First, he is forcefully clear that his scheme is entirely speculative. He is consciously using the creative activity of thinking to produce a conceptual vision of reality that not only allows for the transformation of experience, but places the activity of knowing within experiencing. His initial assumption is that metaphysics is possible, that it is possible for the human mind to think reality in absolute generality. It may not be possible, but if it is possible, then it will be because whatever is the ground of human consciousness is also the ground of everything else. Because if we do not participate in the same ultimate activity as everything else, we would be unable to find in our own experience the insight we would need to think reality in absolute generality. By starting in this way, Whitehead insists on the connectedness of all things. So, if every aspect of our experience must in some way exemplify what is actually real, then if we examine our experience carefully, trying to undermine our existing notions of reality by insisting that nothing gets left out, we may be able to gather the hints we need to characterize a final real thing. That is the sort of thing that underlies everything. He turns to language to find these hints. There are no words that could define a final real thing. Language is not suited to describe what is always everywhere. But out of his examination of experience, he abstracts a relatively small number of ultimate notions that would need to characterize a final real thing if they are to serve as a ground for everything we experience. I offer you some of the main ones. Perhaps they're not what you might expect. Many, one, unity, diversity, importance, expression, perspective, and what he calls the universal of universals, creativity. These ultimate notions aid us only in concert. When brought together, their meanings implicate one another, gesturing towards what is ultimately real. Functioning as a whole, they form the conditions for an intuitive leap. From this assemblage of ultimate notions, he begins the task of systematically developing and demonstrating his speculative metaphysical scheme. Today, I can only provide a glimpse, a peek at the heart of what he achieves, but I think it will. I hope it will suffice. Here's a quote. I'm reading it both for its content and also to provide a feel for his use of language, which we will return to later. I do not expect his meaning to be transparent at first reading, nor does he. Creativity is the universal of universals characterizing ultimate matter of fact. It is that ultimate principle by which the many, which are the universe disjunctively, become the one actual occasion, which is the universe conjunctively. It lies in the nature of things that the many enter into complex unity. Creativity is the principle of novelty. An actual occasion is a novel entity, diverse from any entity in the many which it unifies. Thus, creativity introduces novelty into the content of the many, which are the universe disjunctively. The creative advance is the application of this ultimate principle of creativity to each novel situation which it originates. The passage continues, but later, on the same page, he does something he often does, which is to rephrase and summarize an extended technical discussion in a compact poetic form. He says, the many become one and are increased by one. Here we have our final real thing. Reality is composed of units of creative process. He calls them actual occasions, each one of which forms itself through a process of drawing in all other occasions that have already become, evaluating and unifying them, and in so doing, becoming the completed thing that it is, at which point it takes its place as another one among the many and offers itself up to all those actual occasions that have yet to become. Out of this weaving of relations that constitute generations upon generations of actual occasions, a grand process of creative becoming arises on a cosmic scale. Over the next 400 pages, Whitehead painstakingly reintroduces us to our familiar world and to our familiar selves, but both fundamentally transformed. I hope at this point I provided you with a sense of how Whitehead arrives by a very different route at a characterization of reality and of knowing and doing similar to Steiner's. For both Steiner and Whitehead, we belong to the world's becoming, and in whatever degree we are able to do so, knowing arises in experiencing the creative deeds that meet us in the form of the wider world. Thinking becomes the activity that we mobilize in order to participate consciously and deliberately in guiding the development of that experience, with the aim of increasing the richness, the intensity, and the responsibility of our participation in the world. Steiner offers this understanding of knowing through his experience of his own development. Whitehead, interestingly, comes to this understanding of knowing through his effort to produce a systematic yet entirely speculative metaphysics. With this notion of knowing before us, I turn to the question of reading Steiner and Whitehead. How are their efforts to assist us in experiencing what they've experienced affected by reaching us through writing? How does the necessity of moving through the stillness of the world in order to assist us towards an awareness of the world's creativity affect our activity of reading what they offer? For both of them, I see two broad uses of writing, two modes of assistance. The first is advice on what to do and how to do it. The second are descriptions of their own achievements. Steiner, as you all know, is a master of spiritual exercises. He provides all sorts, some very general, some that form series, some for particular people, conditions, or situations. As texts, these exercises are easily read. But at the same time, it's immediately clear that simply reading the text is not going to get you anywhere. The form of the writing says, okay, get to work. And it's clear that repetition will be required, and it's probably going to be slow going. The other kind of assistance that Steiner offers, which is very different in its form, is comprised of his descriptions of his spiritual experience. He has things to say about almost everything, whether it's bees or cosmic evolution or the karmic connections between Nero and the Crown Prince Rudolf of Austria. These descriptions are also relatively easy to read. You have an idea of what he's saying, but they come with a clear sense that you don't experience what he's describing, not yet anyway. They are offered because by considering them as gestures toward spiritual realities, you form in yourself the beginnings of an openness and an orientation towards the experience out of which he brings them. Turn to Steiner in a moment. Whitehead also has these two modes of offering assistance. As far as advice on how to proceed, he eloquently presents how and why he takes the path he lays out, as well as his struggles. He keeps it relatively short, and it's not hard to understand. He is sure that others will improve on what he has done, and he is as humble as his project is grand. If I had time, I would quote some things, but yes, he's quite the humble guy. Reading his completed, polished presentation of his metaphysical system is quite a different experience. Smiling. Unlike Steiner's descriptions of spiritual experience, Whitehead's description of his vision of reality is incredibly difficult to read, famously so. When my daughter, who is extremely bright, was about 12 years old, she picked up my copy of Process and Reality and started to read. After a moment, she began to chuckle and said, I know all the words, but as I read it, it's like they all end up in a pile at the end of the sentence. So I remember when I first plowed through the book 30 some years ago, there were sections where I would find myself at the bottom of a page and realize I had nothing, go back to the top, read it again, and again, nothing. I finally realized that reading it out loud helped a bit, in part because, content aside, Whitehead is a good writer. As you read, and once you get beyond the initial shock of not having any clue what he's saying, you recognize that here is a text where reading itself is a spiritual practice. It's written in such a way that once you begin to follow him in your thinking, you will in fact be breaking down what you think you know about reality and trying to build up something else in its place as you read. The form of the text makes this unavoidable. This doesn't mean you're going to agree with everything, but you will actually begin to experience things the way he is suggesting that you can experience them if you work through the text in the way that you need to in order to understand it. It's not a matter of something behind the text, some deeper meaning shining through. The whole work is speculative. He's not describing reality. He's describing a speculative conceptual scheme, so that what you're working on in yourself is something that you're already working on by simply reading the text. This is a text that defies any attempt to read it as information. There's nothing informative about it. No, either something transformative is happening in your reading of this text or nothing at all. The difference between reading the descriptive works of Steiner and Whitehead is what suggests the advantage of reading them in relation to one another. It's not about comparing their positions, although that is also worth reflecting on. It's about the activity of reading one, how the activity of reading one aids the activity of reading the other. With respect to Whitehead, as I've already indicated, Steiner helps you recognize the extent to which Whitehead is a spiritual exercise. If this were a Whitehead conference, I would say more. Instead, let's consider Steiner and in the context of Whitehead. I began today with the notion of knowledge as held in descriptions rather than in the activity of experiencing, a notion characteristic of modern Western science, familiar to us all. It's in the water, so I would say we're all susceptible to the habit of reading for information. As I suggested earlier, Steiner's exercises in the way they are written are immune to that problem. But in the way that he quite intentionally presents his descriptions, they are not at all immune. And these constitute the majority of his written work. In order for them to have their intended effect, they must be received in a mood of reverence that arises from the sense of the necessary inadequacy of these descriptions in relation to the experience described. A reverence that these statements, offered in their dry mathematical style, are themselves spiritual exercises. And he warns of the danger that if they are taken up as information, as truths in themselves, they will become actively counterproductive, creating a barrier to the cultivation of spiritual awareness. In my experience, this difficulty arises from two directions, producing a spectrum on which I think we're all to be found. For those who are drawn to Steiner's work, whether through inner or outer practices, the danger comes from the daunting distance between Steiner's awareness and your own, and the sense of your comparative feebleness and slow progress, and the genuine difficulty of being patient with yourself, forgiving yourself for being who you are, accepting and loving what little progress you make, and allowing yourself to give in some form that little bit to others, rather than clinging to Steiner's words and trading these back and forth in conversation as if they were more valuable than that little bit that is genuinely yours to give. The more we cling to Steiner's words, the harder it is not to treat them as claims we must stake, even to the point of their becoming dead truths among which we pick and choose to find a sense of fulfillment. My own sense that if I'm not in some way distressed within myself towards myself by Steiner's words, then I'm not reading them in a way that lets them speak to me as words of a friend, helping me to find my own way into the becoming of the world. At the other end of the spectrum are those who want to study Steiner as an academic topic. If you treat Steiner's work and life as material to analyze, then you and the discipline will be determining the form.
Yes.
The form to which this material should conform in order to apply standard research methods and get this material to offer up what is needed to produce an appropriate description. Somehow, Steiner's work needs to be turned into something to write about. The question I raise is, can you also engage the difficult issue that his entire project is at odds with the project of turning things into objects of study? His whole effort is to work against this. His whole effort is to get human beings to take up the task and recognize the responsibility of cultivating their own awareness of their connection to the activity in the world. That is antithetical to the approach where the first thing you do is to turn it into something that you can understand so that you can use your tools of understanding on it. The tendency in working with written material is to cut it off from any experiential base and turn it into a conceptual system. I suggest that interesting alternative possibilities for academic engagement of Steiner and anthroposophy can be found in the work of academics who have drawn directly on Whitehead to fashion approaches that treat the activity of what is being studied as providing the conditions under which your experience of this activity will be transformed. Specifically, I would point to the work of the past couple decades in the discipline of science studies. Bruno Latour, Isabelle Stenger, and Vincent Després. They are all concerned with how to engage the study of science, and Steiner is presenting a science that treats science as an activity involving human and non-human realities on equal footing that are engaged with one another in the emergence of experiential knowledge in ways that challenge common perceptions about reality. I want to finish off. I did live for several years in China, and I have something I want to offer you at the end here, which you will see. The fish trap is for catching fish. Once you've caught the fish, you can forget the trap. The rabbit snare is for catching rabbits. Once you've caught the rabbit, you can forget the snare. Words are for catching meaning. Once you've caught the meaning, you can forget the words. Oh, where can I find someone who knows how to forget about words, that we might have some words together.
Sponsored by the Program for the Evolution of Spirituality.
Copyright 2023, the President and Fellows of Harvard College.